Memphis fell into darkness. Amun-Hor lay in a pit beneath the temple of Anubis, where the air was thick with the smell of mold, rat tracks, and fear. Chains dug into my wrists, wounds from the whips of the pharaoh's guards bled, and one thought spun in my head. Why me? I was not a thief. I was a scribe, one of those who kept account of the treasury, counted grain for the Nile, recorded merchants' debts, and watched the incense caravans from the south. My hands were in ink, not in blood. But the vizier Setnek decided otherwise. He came to me 3 days ago with the smile of a jackal and a stack of scrolls. Amun-Hor, he said softly, like a snake before striking. The pharaoh demands a report. 300 talents for the campaign to Nubia. Check it. I checked. The numbers did not add up. 200 talents had disappeared. Not an error, forgery. My lord, there is a discrepancy here, I said. His eyes narrowed. Sign it, and that is all. But the truth. The truth? He leaned closer, and I smelled his perfume, incense, and greed. Your sister Merit weaves in the quarter. Good fabrics for the temple. It would be a pity if she were accused of under-delivery. Merit. My younger sister, my only family after our parents' death. Quiet, talented, dreaming of the priest's blessing. I did not sign. The next morning I was seized. The trial at the temple was a performance. The crowd roared. Priests in white linen read the sentence. You stole from the god king. Your ka chokes in the duat. Guards in bronze breastplates with the image of a falcon dragged me to the post. Execution at dawn, public, so that everyone would see the pharaoh's mot. Night brought salvation. The Khamsin, the storm of Set. The wind howled, sand lashed the walls, the guards scattered in panic. A young guard, Kemet, my former neighbor from the quarter, came closer. The chain loosened. I jerked, struck with my elbow, snatched the key, and leapt out into the chaos. Sand beat into my eyes. The wind roared like Jinn from Legends. I ran until my legs gave way near the outskirts. There I fell, and the world went dark. I woke to a voice. Drink or die. Beside me sat a woman of about 30, dark-skinned, with eyes the color of desert khaki, in a cloak of camel wool, and with an amulet of Isis around her neck. Neferu. A Bedouin woman, a survivor of the trails, with a dagger at her belt and a camel behind her. You are a fugitive, she said. The chains are still dangling. I nodded, swallowing water. Yes, leave. The desert does not like the pharaoh's guests, but I saw an oasis. Palms, a spring, ruins of columns, traces of a forgotten temple or outpost. One can live here, I said. Build? She laughed dryly, like the crackle of sand. Alone? Without weapons? You have gone mad from the heat. With your help, no. Neferu fell silent. Her eyes assessed me. Wounds, chains, stubbornness. Madman. But the desert loves such people. Stay. For now. That is how it all began. For 2 days I survived alone. I dug a ditch from the spring to the palms, gathered dates, wove a hut from reeds. Neferu came with salt and water, but did not help, she taught. The desert is not a mother. It is a judge, she said. Show strength and it will give. Show weakness and it will take. On the 3rd day I heard screams. I grabbed a handmade reed spear with a stone tip and climbed the dune. In a hollow were 6 slaves, 4 women, 2 men. Chains on their hands, exhausted with the caravan brands, property of Memphis. Their escorts, 3 bandits with spears, camels, and whips, beat them without mercy. One woman, Tia, fell. Beside her, Bacon, a strong mason with hands like hammers, tried to lift her. Get up, sister, he wheezed. Another Miriam whispered a prayer to Osiris. Sekhmet, a young woman with fire in her eyes, hissed, Cursed dogs! The men, Ptah the craftsman and Esir the blacksmith, dragged the chains. This was a slave trader from Memphis, a typical matter. Slaves were being taken to the mines of Nubia. I could have left, but I saw my own chains in their eyes. I went down. The first bandit died from a stone to the temple. The second from a spear to the throat. The third managed to swing, but Neferu, emerging from behind the dune, threw a dagger into his back. The slaves froze. Tia, the eldest with a scarred face, stood first. Are you a messenger of Anubis? No, I answered. Amun-Hor, a fugitive like you. Bacon clenched his fist. What now? Will you finish us off? No, you will help build. Here, the Oasis. Sekhmet snorted. Build! We are slaves. You were. Now you are the people of Amon-Oa. Ta, thin with the fingers of an artist, asked, "Why?" I looked at the water. Because the desert gives a chance. We will take it. They were silent. Then Tia nodded. Better to build than to rot in a mine. That is how my first comrades appeared. The slaves became family. Bacon dug wells. Water is the blood of the Oasis, he growled, biting into the sand. His wife Miriam gathered dates, quiet but with a will of steel. Their son ran with stones, learning accuracy. Ptah repaired, spears, baskets, canals. A tool is life, he repeated. Tia ruled the women. Sewed, baked, healed with herbs. Her scars were metals. Sekhmet and Aesir guarded the trails. Sekhmet threw knives like lightning. Aesir forged the first bronze tips. Neferu led the Bedouins, scouting, water, salt. I drew plans. A ring canal, clay walls, a tower, granaries, a temple. The first week was hell. Sand got everywhere, water ran out, hands bled. But we held on. In the evening by the fire, Bacon said, "You are not a pharaoh, Amenhor, but there is fire in you." Neferu added, "The fire of the desert, it burns but it warms." Merit, my sister, came later. A caravan brought rumors about her. She was alive, weaving in the quarter. But I knew, Set-necked would not forgive. A month later, the harvest. Dates, grain from the first sowings, water in the canals. A feast at the future temple, flatbread, honey, beer, flutes. Cleopatra Necht, a priestess whom Neferu had brought from the ruins, performed the kepet, the ritual of rebirth. Milk, incense, hymns to Isis. People danced, children laughed. But there were cracks at the feast. Rahotep, a former guard, drank and muttered, "The pharaoh is a god. We are rebels." He was supported by Aesir, not to be confused with the blacksmith. Caravans avoid us. Neferu whispered, "They are afraid and angry. I called a council. We need legitimacy, a temple, trade." Cleopatra nodded. The first caravan from Dakhla, Mentuhotep, a fat merchant with gold bracelets. "Master?" he shouted. "Amenhor." He examined the walls. "The pharaoh's fugitive?" "Lord of Amon-Oa." We traded. Dates for salt, bronze. The priest Ptahhotep blessed the temple, but warned, "The pharaoh knows. Pay tribute." I refused. Rahotep set fire to the granary. We caught him with his henchmen. Bacon broke his arm. Neferu put a dagger to his throat. Trial at the temple. Cleopatra read Ma'at. Chaos is the enemy of Isis. They were banished into the desert without water. But Rahotep shouted, "Set-necked will return." He returned. Set-necked came with 100 guards, chariots, archers. "Open the gates!" he roared. "I from the tower. Return, my sister." The crowd laughed. Assault. Oil boiled, stones flew. Neferu's Bedouins cut the flanks. The chariots got stuck in the sand. Cleopatra sang curses of Set. The sand rose in a storm. Set-necked fell at the gates, his head on the wall. The pharaoh sent an ultimatum. We became 500. Amon-Oa was a legend. But the war grew. After Set-necked's death, the desert changed. Not physically, the same dunes, the same merciless heat, the same blue sky without a single cloud. But something in the air became different, heavier. Like before a storm, when the wind has not yet come, but can already be felt beyond the horizon. I stood in the tower every morning and looked at the trails, those along which merchants, refugees, and enemies came. Now they carried more and more news, and each was like a stone in water. A small splash, then circles that did not stop. The news of Set-necked's death spread through the desert faster than the wind. Some heard, "A fugitive from the pit killed the pharaoh's vizier." Others, "A new lord has risen in the oasis." Still others from distant nomadic tribes. In Amon-Oa, there is water, food, and protection. And all three versions worked for us because people living in the desert understand only one language. The language of strength and water. And we had both. We became 500. It sounded beautiful. But 500 mouths are 500 reasons for panic, division, and hunger. I understood this on the very first morning after the battle when Tia came to me with a report on supplies. She placed a clay tablet with numbers on the table and said shortly, "Grain for 3 weeks, oil for 10 days. There is enough water in the canals, but if more people come, a fourth well is needed. I looked at the numbers and felt the joy of victory give way to the weight of responsibility. Is the third well ready? I asked. Bacon will finish tomorrow. We will begin the fourth the day after tomorrow. There are no people. Everyone is tired after the fight. People are tired of the fight, I agreed. But they will be even more tired of hunger. Bacon understands. Tia nodded without unnecessary words and left. That was what I liked about her. She did not ask twice. An order is the beginning, not the end of a conversation. Bacon, when I found him at the third well, looked like a man whom the desert had chewed for 3 days in a row. His face gray from dust, hands covered in calluses, eyes red. But he was digging. The fourth, I said. He stuck the shovel into the sand. When? The day after tomorrow. He was silent for a while. Then, give me Ta and 4 newcomers. Good. And water. Normal water. Not that swamp filth we have been drinking since morning. I grinned. You will have it. He took up the shovel again and muttered under his breath, something about gods who clearly invented the desert on a bad day. Together with the news of victory came new people. First 3 fugitive peasants from Dakla. A family, Father Horemheb, wife Nefertari, and teenage son Angkor, thin with sunburned faces. Horemheb said, "The tax collector drove us off the land. He says we underpaid. But we paid. Everything down to the last grain." Nefertari added quietly, "Our house was burned. I did not ask more. I showed them a place by the wall where they could build a hut." Next came 2 blacksmiths from Memphis, Heku and Rameri. They had heard about Isir, our blacksmith, and wanted to work. Their hands spoke for themselves. Calluses, burns, precise movements. Such people do not need to be tested. And then the most unexpected guest. Amenhotep, son of Hapu, an old man of about 60 in worn but once expensive linen. Gray hair, a staff of ebony wood, the sign of Thoth around his neck. A priest, or a former priest. He came alone without a camel, with a small bag and big eyes that had seen too much. "Are you a Monhor?" he asked. "Yes, I heard you're building." "Truly building. I am trying." He was silent, looking at the walls, canals, tower. "I need a place. I have nothing to pay with. But I can write, count, read the stars, and know the laws. When the Pharaoh comes to judge you next time, you will need a man who knows how to speak with the gods." Neferu, standing nearby, whispered to me, "The old man is smart, but where is he from?" "From Karnak," he answered without turning around. I was driven out for reading the omens too honestly. Cleopatra, appearing from the temple, looked at him. "Amenhotep from Karnak? I have heard of you. I hope good things. Different things." They looked at each other for a second, and there was a whole story in that look. I took him in, because a man driven out for honesty is worth more than 100 flatterers. Construction. The next 3 weeks were the hardest and the most alive. The fourth well gave water on the 9th day. Bacon sat on its edge, looked down, and was silent for 3 minutes. Then he stood up, grabbed me by the shoulder, and said, "This is our water. Not the Pharaoh's, ours." That was more important than any victory. Ta started new huts. Clay, palm beams, straw roofs, fast and strong. Heku and Rameri set up a real forge with bellows and an anvil. The first bronze spearhead that Isir brought me was warm from the fire. Amenhotep took up the records. He sat for whole days with papyrus and a reed pen, compiling a register. People, supplies, debts, buildings. His calligraphy was flawless and the numbers precise. "You are good at this," I said once. "I counted offerings to the gods for 30 years. "Switching to dates is not difficult," he answered. Tia organized the women. Nefertari baked. Miriam wove. Sekhmet trained the young to throw knives. Children ran between the huts and carried stones not as slaves, but as participants in construction who understood. Every stone makes the wall higher. Merit, my sister, came 3 weeks later. No, she did not simply come. Mentuhotep brought her. When his camels appeared at the gates, I came down from the wall to meet him. The merchant jumped down from the saddle, spread his arms, and roared, "Amenhor! I have salt for you, bronze, 3 sacks of incense and something else." A woman stepped out from behind his camel, thin in simple linen, with a bruise under her left eye and fingers pricked by a needle. She saw me and froze. I froze too. Merit. She ran. We embraced so tightly that I felt... This is what all this was for. Not for power, not for revenge, for this. So that those you love would be safe. She whispered, I thought you were dead. They said you were executed. No, I said, only driven out. She pulled away and looked at the walls, canals, tower, people, at everything we had built. You did this? Out of the desert? We did, all of us. She wiped her eyes. Set-necked was looking for me. Mentuhotep hid me in the wagon train. I looked at the merchant. He shrugged. You pay well in dates. It is an investment. Greedy and right, the best type of ally. Counsel by the fire. That night we gathered by the great fire before the temple. It was no longer a random camp. It was a capital. Small, made of clay and palms, but real. I looked at the faces. Bacon with Miriam, Ptah, Tia, Neferu, Cleopatra, Amenhotep, Heku, Sekhmet, Angkor, the young son of Horemheb, who looked at the fire as at the future. We need a system, I said. Amenhotep nodded. Laws, and something else. We need people to know there are rules here, fair ones. Cleopatra added, Ma'at, balance. Yes, 3 laws of Amon-Oa. I spoke, Amenhotep wrote. The first law, water for all. Without exceptions. Rich, poor, refugee, warrior, everyone has the right to water, because the desert kills with thirst, not with a sword. The second law, work according to skill. Everyone does what they are strong at, not humiliation and not privilege. A blacksmith forges, a baker bakes, a warrior guards. There are no idlers, only those who have not yet found their place. The third law, judgment by Ma'at. Any dispute is decided by the council of elders before the temple. Not fists, not money, witnesses and truth. Neferu said, beautiful words, but they work only if they are enforced. We will enforce them, Bacon answered. How? If you break them yourself, you will deal with me yourself. He raised his fist. Laughter by the fire. But not light laughter, the kind born from the understanding. Someone is ready to stand for words. The next day, the first trial. Horemheb accused a young nomad, Sif, of stealing grain. Sif denied it. One witness, but uncertain. I sat on the stone chair Ptah had made in 2 days. Beside me, Amenhotep with papyrus, Cleopatra with an amulet. I listened to both. Sif, if you stole, admit it. Punishment is a week without ration. If not, say so. He was silent. Then I took it. But I had been starving for 3 days. Horemheb exploded. So stealing is allowed? No, I said. But you are full and he was starving. Why did he not receive a ration? Silence. It turned out, during ration distribution, nomads were given less. An old habit. A stranger gets less. This is a violation of the first law, I said. Sif is guilty of theft. 3 days without ration. But the person responsible for rations is guilty of discrimination. A week of work at the well, both punished, both fairly. After the trial, Amenhotep said, you think like a scribe. You see the system, not the person. Sometimes that is good, sometimes not. A leader must sometimes see the person too. The old man was right, I remembered. In the 5th week, a strange man came to us. At night, without a camel, without water, in a dark cloak with a hood. The guards seized him at the wall. He did not resist. When they removed the hood, a young face, frightened, with the brand of a scribe on the wrist. My name is Horsa, he said. I am from the Pharaoh's palace. The guards tensed. Wait, I stopped them. Speak. I have heard about you. You are Amen-Hor, the scribe whom Set-necht framed? Yes, I know who stole the 300 talents. Silence. Neferu nearby put her hand on her dagger. Speak. Horsa swallowed. Set-necht took 200. The remaining 100. The high priest of Amun-Ptahmeh. They both knew? Both. The pharaoh knew nothing. Amenhotep, standing behind my back, said barely audibly, this changes everything. I looked at Horsa. Why did you come to me? Because Toms now wants to remove me. I saw the scroll. I am a witness. What do you want? Protection and justice. I was silent for a minute, then, you stay. We will protect you. But everything you know, you will tell at the council. He nodded. Neferu took me aside. Is this a trap? Possibly. And you accepted him? Yes, why? Because if he is telling the truth, we have a weapon stronger than any wall. A scroll. She was silent, clever, but dangerous. The desert is dangerous. We stayed. Mentuhotep returned a week later with news. He sat at our table, ate dates, drank beer, and spoke with such an air as if he were doing us a favor. The pharaoh is displeased. Setnecht's death is not just the loss of a vizier, it is a blow to authority. Now the southern nomarchs see, the Oasis holds. 2 of them have already asked through intermediaries whether they can trade with Amon-Oa directly. And what did you answer? I asked. That I would ask you a question and take 5% from any deal. 3, 4, 3.5. He laughed, agreed, then seriously, but the pharaoh is preparing a new campaign, not with a vizier, with a general, Horemheb-Ha. A real warrior, not a politician. He will not bargain at the gates. This was important information. I passed it on to the council. Amenhotep read the stars that night for a long time, with papyrus and feathers. At dawn, he said, Mars is rising. War is coming, but Isis stands higher. Cleopatra added, we need a ritual, a great one, so that people see the gods are with us. I agreed. We arranged a great Kepet, a festival of rebirth at the temple of Isis. The whole settlement, 500 people. Cleopatra and Amenhotep conducted the ritual together. The first sacrificial bull, bought from Mentuhotep, incense, milk, Nile water, which one of the traders had specially brought. The fire burned so high that it could be seen beyond the dunes. People sang hymns to Isis, those who knew the words, those who simply hummed in rhythm. Children danced. Bacon embraced Miriam. Ptah played a flute he had carved himself. Sekhmet and Isir stood side by side, and between them was that silence which speaks louder than words. Merit sat beside me. Are you happy? She asked. I looked at the people, at the fire, at the walls. No, but I am living, fully. She took my hand. Mother would be proud. I had not expected that. I clenched my teeth so as not to show tears. Then Amenhotep stood before the fire and spoke. His voice was old, but there was strength in it. We are not gods, we are people. But people who hold together are stronger than any god alone. Isis sees us. Anubis awaits us, but not today. Today, we live and build. The crowd roared. I stood up and said what I had not planned. Amon-Oa is not an oasis. It is a kingdom, our kingdom. And no pharaoh will take the water we found, the walls we raised, and the people we saved. Silence. Then Bacon roared first, Amon-Hor. And 500 voices took it up. It was not a title, not yet. But in that cry there was an oath, the very one that does not need to be written on papyrus. That night, when everyone had dispersed, Neferu approached me. You spoke well, not too grandiloquently? She shrugged. Grandiloquence is when there is emptiness inside. You are not empty. They hear the difference. Then she went into the night, as always without farewells. I remained by the dying fire. Tomorrow the pharaoh's new general would come. Tomorrow the real war would begin. Tomorrow we would need to think about defense, supplies, allies, diplomacy. But today 500 people spoke my name, and the oasis lived. Morning came with the smell of dust and anxiety. I woke before dawn, as always. It had become a habit from the first days in the oasis. The desert lives by its own clock, and whoever wants to understand it must wake before the sun. In the pre-dawn silence, everything can be heard. How sand rustles by the wall, how water splashes in the canal, how a camel coughs at the far end of the stable. Every sound is information. Today the silence was different. Too quiet. I went up to the tower, wrapped in a wool cloak. The sky was only just beginning to brighten in the east, a thin orange stripe above the dunes, like a brushstroke. Neferu was already standing above, looking toward the northern trail. Dust, she said without turning around. I looked where her gaze pointed. On the horizon, still far away but already distinguishable, hung a cloud of dust. Not from the wind, from thousands of feet, hooves, and wheels. Big? Very, she answered. Chariots, infantry, a wagon train? I would say about 1,000, maybe more. I was silent for a minute. 1,000 warriors against our 500, of whom at most 150 were real fighters. The rest were peasants, craftsmen, women, children. Good people, loyal, hard-working, but not an army. Will they reach by noon? I asked. By mid-morning, if they march without halts. Then we have 3 hours. I came down from the tower and woke the entire council. They gathered in the longhouse, Bacon with sleepy eyes but already with a hammer at his belt, Ptah in a work tunic, Tia with a cup of herbal decoction, Cleopatra in ritual linen, Amenhotep with papyrus and a reed pen already ready, Merit, Sekhmet, Horsa. Neferu brought dusty boots. She had already managed to run out on foot for reconnaissance. "It is Horemheb-Ha," she said, placing the boots on the ground and sitting down. My people saw the banner, a falcon in a golden circle, his personal one. Amenhotep lowered his pen. "Horemheb-Ha. I know that name." "Who is he?" Bacon asked. "A military nomarch of the southwestern lands. Not just a warrior, an administrator of war. He does not storm cities. He strangles them, cuts off supplies, occupies the trails, waits until the enemy collapses on his own. Silence. This was worse than a direct assault. We had already repelled a direct assault. But strangulation is a slow death from which there is no escape." "How much water do we have?" I asked Tia. 4 wells. If we do not spend it on sowing for about 2 months. But then the next harvest will be 0. Food? For 6 weeks. If strict, then his plan is a siege, I said. He will stand around us and wait. "And us?" Sekhmet asked. She sat straight with a knife on her knee and looked as if she were already measuring herself for battle. "We will not wait," I answered. Everyone looked at me. "Explain," Amenhotep said. I took a piece of charcoal from the floor and began drawing on a flat stone. The oasis, a dot. The trails around it, lines. Army positions, circles. He will take 3 trails, the northern, western, and southern. To the east, rocks and shifting sand. Chariots will not pass there. That is his weak point. Our Bedouins know that trail." Neferu nodded. "I can guide people. Then we are not under siege, we are in a partial encirclement from which there is a way out. This changes everything. Through the east we can receive supplies if Mentuhotep does not get scared." "Mentuhotep will not get scared if he is paid enough," Bacon snorted. "Then we need silver? And quickly." "From where?" Tia asked. I looked at Horsa, who had been sitting in the corner silently all this time. "Horsa." He raised his head. "You spoke of a scroll. With proof of who truly stole the pharaoh's treasury?" "Yes. Where is it now?" "With me. A copy. The original is in the Karnak temple, behind the 3rd altar. I hid it myself before I fled." Amenhotep became animated. "The Karnak temple? Tommy's priests are there." "Yes, but there are also priests there who hate Toms. I know one of them personally, the priest Minmes. An honest man, old with arthritis and impossible integrity. Will he give the scroll? If he is asked correctly. And if he is alive." I stood up. "Here is the plan. Neferu leads Horsa through the eastern trail to Mentuhotep. Mentuhotep organizes the transfer of a man to Karnak. Minmes hands over a copy of the scroll. We receive the evidence and send it directly to the pharaoh." "Directly to the pharaoh?" Merit asked again. "Bypassing Toms and any vizier." "How? Through a messenger whom the pharaoh trusts more than courtiers?" "Who is that?" Amenhotep slowly smiled. "The pharaoh's wife, Tia Nefer. She is from a southern lineage, and she has long been dissatisfied with the influence of the Karnak priests at court." Everyone looked at the old man. "How do you know?" Cleopatra asked. "Because 20 years ago I was her teacher," he answered calmly. "And she wrote to me as recently as a year ago, through a safe messenger." Bacon rubbed his face. "Old man, you could have said that earlier. You did not ask him." I looked at Amenhotep and understood. He had not come to us by chance. He knew what he was doing when he called himself just an exiled priest. "Good," I said. "Then we write a letter to Tia Nefer." "Do you remember how to address her?" "I remember everything I wrote for her and everything she wrote to me." "Then begin. Right now." While Amenhotep wrote, I dealt with the second part of the plan. 3 hours is not much, but enough if you know what to do. I divided the people into groups. Bacon took the builders and reinforced the gates, additional bolts, supports, layers of tarred wood outside. Ptah placed oil jars on the walls, heavy ones with long handles ready to be overturned. Heku and Ra-Meri handed out weapons, spears, knives, bows. Sekhmet lined the archers in 3 rows on the towers. Tia organized the supplies. Grain was moved to the central storehouse, water to reserve basins, herbs, and linen bandages for wounds to the hut by the temple. Cleopatra performed a quick ritual at the gates, sprinkled the thresholds with water from the Nile, lit incense, murmured words of protection. It was not magic in the literal sense, but people saw a priestess speaking the words of the goddess, and their shoulders straightened. Fear did not go away, but it mixed with something else, stubbornness. Merit asked me for a minute before I climbed the wall. "Will you not lie down?" she asked. "At least for an hour." "No. You did not sleep all night. I will sleep tonight, if you survive." Merit. "What? Stop saying if." She squeezed my hand, not gently, firmly, like a person who is afraid but does not show it. "Go," she said. I went. Horemheb-Ha appeared at our walls at the moment when the sun had risen high enough to shine straight into the eyes of those standing in the north. It was an army, a real army of the Pharaoh, not Set-Necht's hastily gathered detachment, but a regular force with chariots, archers in leather armor, infantry with large rectangular shields, and standard bearers. The general himself rode in front. Horemheb-Ha was not at all what I had imagined him to be. I had expected a loud warlord with golden breastplates and shouting. Instead, I saw a calm man of about 50, on a black horse, in simple leather armor without decorations. Bald, sunburned, almost black, with a face on which there was neither rage nor a smile. Just cold assessment. He looked at our walls the way a builder looks at someone else's masonry, professionally, searching for weaknesses. He stopped at arrow flight distance and was silent for a long time. Then he said, not shouted, but exactly said calmly, as if addressing one person. "Amun-Hor, I have heard of you." I stood on the wall. "Horemheb-Ha, I have too." "Then you understand what will happen. You will set up camp on 3 trails and wait until we die of hunger." He nodded slightly. "Or until you open the gates yourself. Did a third option not occur to you?" "Which one?" "That we will neither die nor open them." He looked at me for a long time. "You fought well against Set-Necht. But Set-Necht was a politician. I am not. I can see that. Then think quickly. You have until sunset." He turned his horse and rode back to his men. The army began setting up camp. Neferu stood beside me. "Smart," she said quietly. "Yes, he will not storm right away." "No, he will apply pressure. Then we need to act before he tightens the ring." "Exactly." Sekhmet's night raid. Sekhmet proposed the plan before sunset. She came to me directly without prefaces. Their wagon train stands by the northern dunes. Without guards, only 3 sentries and 2 slaves. I saw it myself through the rock. How do you know? I went out. Through the eastern trail, went around over the stones. I looked at her. It was a risk. Risk is needed. Their wagon train is food, oil, arrows, ropes. If we burn the wagon train, they will lose supplies for a week. It is not victory, but it is time. Bacon immediately said, "I am going." "No," Sekhmet stopped him. "You are too big. You can be heard a verst away." Bacon was offended. "I am quiet, like a camel in a forge." Ptah laughed. Bakan kept silent because arguing with the truth is pointless. Sekhmet took 4 people. 2 young Bedouins of Neferu, the blacksmith Isir, and the teenager Angkor, who had volunteered himself and knew how to walk over stones silently like a cat. I gave them oil and leather water skins and 3 firestones. "Burn the wagon train, but do not touch the people unless necessary," I said. "This is war," Sekhmet answered. "Yes, but later I will have to negotiate with the Pharaoh. Less blood means a simpler agreement." She looked at me with an expression that is difficult to describe, something between respect and disagreement. "Good," she said. "We will try." They left into the night through the eastern trail. I did not sleep. I sat by the wall and listened. Amenhotep sat beside me with the letter to Tia Nefer, which he had just finished. He reread it quietly, moving his lips. "Is it written well?" I asked. "It is written perfectly," he answered without unnecessary modesty. "I know what she likes to hear, but not flattery. She hates flattery. Truth presented with dignity." "What did you write?" That her husband, the great Pharaoh, has been deceived by those he trusted. That the true thieves are set-necked and tames. That the man who was sentenced in absentia for their crimes built a kingdom in the desert, one that holds water, feeds refugees, and honors Ma'at. And that if the Pharaoh recalls the army and grants a trial, this man will bring evidence and stand before the throne. I was silent. You wrote that I will stand before the throne? Yes, that is a bold promise. Great promises make great men. Or destroy them. We shall see. At that moment, in the north, it flared. Orange fire shot up over the dunes, short, bright, like a cry in the night. Then another, and another. The army camp exploded with shouts. I stood and watched the fire. Sekhmet had done her work. Dawn after the fire, Sekhmet returned before dawn, dusty, with a burn on her left hand, pleased. 3 carts with oil, 2 with grain, 1 with ropes and arrows, she reported. Everything? People? 2 guards ran immediately. The 3rd tried to stop us. Aesir laid him down with a blow to the head. Alive, just sleeping. Slaves? She was silent for a second. We took them with us. 4, they asked themselves. I nodded. Good. 4 new people in Amon-Oa. I was not even surprised. Our oasis attracted people as naturally as it attracts water in the desert. Bacon examined Sekhmet's burn, cursing the gods and the fire. Tia brought ointment from aloe and linen oils. Sekhmet winced, but did not complain. Ankur, the young son of Horemheb, sat in the corner with wide-open eyes. It was his first raid. His father looked at him with an expression in which pride and horror were mixed. Are you all right? I asked the boy. Yes, he said. Only my hands are shaking. That is normal. If they do not shake, it means you do not understand what you are doing. He nodded and clenched his fists, trying to calm down. By mid-morning, Horemheb-Ha sent a messenger. A young officer, clearly nervous, stopped before the gates and shouted, "The general offers negotiations, without weapons, 1 person from each side." I turned to the council. Neferu shook her head. Bacon crossed his arms. Cleopatra was silent. Amenhotep said, "Go. It may be a trap. Horemheb-Ha is not one of those who trap through negotiations. That is not his style. He lost the wagon train and wants to understand whom he is dealing with. Are you sure?" "No, but this is the only chance to buy time for Horsa and the letter." I went out. We met between the wall and his camp, just 2 men on the sand, under the morning sun. Horemheb-Ha was without guards. So was I. Only a dagger at the belt, more a habit than a threat. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You burned my wagon train. My people burned it. Yes, smart. Forced." "One does not exclude the other," he said. "I have fought for 20 years. I have seen everything. You do not look like a rebel." "What do I look like?" "An administrator? One who can wage war. Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation. You built a system here in a year. Water, walls, laws, court. Random bandits do not do that." "No," I agreed. "That is done by people who have nowhere else to go." He was silent. "The Pharaoh wants your head. The Pharaoh wants to restore his reputation. That is different." The general narrowed his eyes slightly. "The difference? If you kill me, the desert will get a martyr. That is worse for the Pharaoh than a living fugitive. Every refugee, every peasant whom a tax collector has robbed will remember the name Amun-Hor as a symbol. The dead cannot be silenced." A long pause. The wind raised dust between us. "You are offering a deal," he said. "I am offering a possibility. If the Pharaoh has proof that the true thief is his own vizier and high priest, he does not need my corpse. He needs a trial, and the restoration of Ma'at. Words. Soon there will be scrolls." Horemheb-Ha looked at me with the expression of an experienced man who was used to not trusting, but knew how to listen. "How much time do you need?" 2 weeks. He sighed. "I will give you 5 days. Then an order is an order, 5 is little, 7. I cannot do more. I have a superior too." For the first time in our conversation, I almost smiled. 7 days, I agreed. We parted. I returned behind the wall and immediately called Neferu. 7 days. Horsa must be at Mentuhotep's by tomorrow evening. She was already in her boots. We leave in an hour. When the sun was setting, I stood on the tower and looked at the army camp. 1,000 men. Fires. Tents. The smell of boiled meat. Horemheb-Ha somewhere there, reading reports or looking at the stars. Amenhotep came up beside me. 7 days, he said. That is very little. Mentuhotep is fast when he is paid. And Minmazen Karnak? He is old, but principled. You said so yourself. Amenhotep nodded. I wrote to him too, together with the letter for Tia Nefer. 2 scrolls, 2 addressees. That was right, that was obvious. We stood in silence. Below, Bakken checked the gates. Tia handed out supper. Merit carried water to the temple. Sekhmet trained young archers by the wall. Even with the burn on her hand, she did not stop. Do you think the pharaoh will pardon us? I asked. Amenhotep was silent for a long time. The pharaoh will pardon you if it is profitable for Ma'at and for his image. He will remove the guilty, restore justice, and allow you to exist. But not as an equal, as useful. That is enough. Enough for now. Then we will see. I looked at the oasis, at the palms, canals, walls, lights of the huts, people going about their business, cooking, praying, laughing, quarreling, building. This was my city, not the pharaoh's. Mine. And I will not surrender it for 7 days, 7 years, or 7 lives. Merit called from below. Amen-Hor, supper. Amenhotep smirked. Go, rulers eat too. I went down. Neferu left with Horsa before dawn. I saw them from the wall, 2 silhouettes dissolving in the pre-dawn gray air. Neferu walked first, confidently, as if the desert were her home and not a prison. Horsa hurried after her, holding his cloak with one hand and pressing a leather tube with letters to his chest with the other. The tube was wrapped in wet cloth so that the papyrus would not dry out in the heat. I watched until they disappeared behind the first dune. Then I went down and dealt with the city. Because a city does not wait while its leader worries. A city lives by its own rhythm, mourning, dense, smelling of bread, dung, wood, and water. Women carried water from the canals. The blacksmiths Heku and Rameri were already thundering with hammers. Ptah repaired the broken axle of one of the carts, cursing the wood that cracks like an old priest. Tia handed out morning rations at the warehouse methodically, without unnecessary words, with that iron precision that made her irreplaceable. I walked through the entire oasis on foot. It was a habit I had started in the first weeks, every morning on foot through the whole settlement. Not for beauty, not so people would see the leader. For information, because what you see yourself with your own eyes is 10 times more valuable than what is reported to you. Today I saw fatigue. Not fear, not despair, exactly fatigue. People worked, but their shoulders were slightly lowered. Children ran more quietly than usual. At the market under the awning, they spoke in low voices. The army beyond the walls pressed not physically, psychologically, simply by the fact of its existence there outside. I stopped at the well where the young nomad Sif, the same one whom I had judged for stealing grain, was drawing water for the camels. "What is the mood in the quarter?" I asked. He raised his head. He was a little surprised that I was asking him specifically. "People are afraid," he answered honestly. "They say 7 days is too little, that the pharaoh will wipe us out anyway. And what do you think?" He was silent. "I think that before I had nothing. Now there is water, food, and a place where I am not beaten. If I have to fight for that, I will fight." I nodded. Well said. He blushed slightly under his tan. I went farther. Amenhotep sat by the temple. Before him on the ground were spread papyri, fortification plans, supply registers, lists of people. He had been working since morning, as always, with that speed which is deceptive. It seems the old man barely moves, but by noon he is ready what would take a young man a day. "A problem," he said without lifting his head. "What kind?" "We have a spy." I stopped. "How do you know?" He finally lifted his head and looked at me over the papyrus. "Because last night someone lit a small fire on the eastern wall. 3 flashes, then put it out. It is a signal. To whom? Either to the army, or to someone behind the army." "Did you see it yourself?" "No," Miriam told me. She could not sleep feeding the child. She saw it from the hut window. I sat beside him on a stone. A spy. Inside. The first reaction was rage. The second, cold calculation. "We cannot raise the alarm," I said. "I know. If the spy feels that we know, he will leave or do something rash. Then we observe quietly." "Exactly. I have already asked Sekhmet." She agreed. I looked at the old man. You decided everything before me? I suggested options, he corrected gently. You decide, then yes. Sekhmet observes, quietly. No arrests until it is clear who. Amenhotep nodded and returned to the papyrus. On the second day, the unexpected happened. Enemies did not come to the gates. People came. A family of 5, husband, wife, 3 children. From Dakhla, where the new tax collector had taken the last grain. Behind them, 2 old people from an abandoned nomad camp. Then a young priest from a small temple on the trail, which the general's soldiers had destroyed when setting up camp. 11 people in all. Horemheb-Ha's army stood on 3 trails, but let refugees pass because the general was smart. He knew that refugees would eat up our supplies faster than a siege. Tia came to me with a face on which a dilemma was written. Do we let them in? Yes, we have supplies for 6 weeks. Every new mouth shortens the time. I know, we let them in. Why? I looked at her. Because if we begin closing the gates before refugees, we will become what they are fleeing from. And because every new person is hands, and we need hands. Tia was silent for a moment. Good. But then strict accounting is needed. The new ones do not receive full rations immediately. First half until they prove they work. Fair. And let the priest help Cleopatra. 1 priest is an extra mouth. 2 priests are already a temple. I grinned. You are right. She left and I thought, Tia is one of those people without whom cities do not exist. Not leaders, not warriors, but those who count, organize, and do not let the system fall apart in the little things. The market under the awning that day was alive despite the siege, despite the anxiety. Horemheb and Nefertari traded flatbreads. Rameri sold bronze hooks for camel harness. Nomads exchanged wool for dates. I walked among the people and listened. They say the Pharaoh will send another army, one woman whispered to another. They say Karnak already knows about us. They say Amenhotep wrote a letter to the Pharaoh himself. The last was true, but how did they know? I looked around. A young priest stood nearby, the one who had come that morning. He looked at me with interest. Are you talking about the letter? I asked him directly. He was not embarrassed. I heard a conversation by the well. The old scribe was speaking with the priestess, Amenhotep. Yes, he said, the letter is gone. Now we wait. I sighed inwardly. Amenhotep knew how to keep silent about what mattered and speak about what was no longer important to hide. Apparently, he had decided that the rumor about the letter was useful, that it would lift spirits. Perhaps he was right. What is your name? I asked the priest. Harishef, servant of Khnum from the small temple on the trail. Khnum, the potter god, who shapes people from clay. Yes, he said with a slight smile. I think he would like you. You also shape people out of the desert. I looked at him more closely. A young man of about 25. An intelligent gaze without fear, with that calm confidence that people have when they believe sincerely and not out of duty. Speak with Cleopatra, I said. She will find you a place. He bowed. On the 3rd day, Bakken finished the 4th well. He came to me during the day, dusty, with calluses that could no longer be called calluses, but simply part of his hands. He placed on the table a flat stone with scratched lines, a diagram of the well and canal. There is water, he said. Good water, cleaner than the 3rd. Depth? 12 cubits. There is a hard bed under the sand. Water runs right between the stones. Volume? Enough for 100 people a day for sure. If we run a canal to the gardens, we can plant another half hectare with dates. Do it. Will you give people? How many do you need? 8. For 3 days. Take the newcomers. Tia assigned them to the work. Bacon nodded but did not leave. He hesitated, put the stone on the table, lifted it, put it down again. That was not in his character. What else? I asked. He looked straight at me. Miriam saw that signal fire. She told Amenhotep, and he told me that he had already told you. I want to know, when they find who did it, will you let me talk to him first? No. He frowned. Why? Because talk means you will break something unnecessary. I first need to understand why he is doing it. Money, fear, threats to family? What difference does it make? A big one. If someone is holding him by the throat, that is one story. If he sold himself willingly, another. Bacon looked at me for a long time. Then, sometimes you think too much. Sometimes that is useful. Sometimes he repeated with emphasis. But he agreed. Sekhmet came on the fourth day early in the morning while the market had not yet opened. She entered without knocking, put a clay lamp on the table, and said, "Found him." I raised my head. "Who?" "Ren Nakht, one of the newcomers. He came 2 weeks ago with a group of refugees from Memphis. Said he had been a merchant ruined after the Pharaoh's tax." Said? Merchants do not do this. She placed a small leather pouch beside the lamp. I opened it. Inside were 3 silver rings, a plate with a seal, and a strip of papyrus with tiny writing. I took the papyrus and read it. It was a report. Brief, clear, professional. Number of people, supplies, location of wells, names of elders. Date 3 days ago. He had managed to send 1 report before he was found out. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Working with Ta, repairing wheels." "Did you watch all night?" "Both night and day." He passed the message through a boy, that same nomad who goes for water to the eastern wall. The boy is innocent. They simply gave him a coin to take a note to a friend. Does the boy know? No. I intercepted the last note before he reached the wall. I looked at the papyrus. Good. Take him quietly. No noise, no scenes at the market. To the temple. Will you speak yourself? Yes. An hour later, Ren Nakht sat before me in the temple of Isis. Cleopatra stood by the altar. Amenhotep with papyrus at the wall. Sekhmet at the door. Ren Nakht was about 40 with an ordinary face, gray eyes, nothing special. It is precisely such people who become good spies. He looked at me without panic. Only fatigue. Do you know why you are here? I asked. Yes. Who sent you? Silence. Ren Nakht. You are in the temple of Isis. A lie here has a price. He looked at the altar, at Cleopatra, at the amulet in her hands. Tommy's, he said, the high priest of Amun. Personally, through an intermediary, a man in Memphis. I was given silver, a legend, and a task. Get into Amun Oe, watch, report. Have you been working for him long? 3 years. Do you have family? He clenched his teeth. A wife and daughter in Memphis. Tommy's holds them? A pause. Not directly, but he knows where they are. That is enough. Amenhotep quietly whispered to me. Like gear. I nodded. The same story in different worlds. A man broken not by greed but by fear for those he loves. What have you already managed to pass on? I asked. 1 report, before the interception. What was in it? Number of people, supplies, wells. Nothing about plans and letters, because you did not know? Because I did not have time to learn. I looked at him for a long time. You understand that I can exile you, or worse? Yes, but I will not do that. He raised his eyes. Because I need you, I continued. You are connected to Thames. This is a channel. Through this channel, we can pass to him exactly what we want him to know. False information. Ren Nakht slowly straightened. You want to use me against him? I want to give you a chance. You help us. We help your family get out of Memphis. Mentuhotep has people. It is real. He was silent for a very long time. Then, what needs to be passed on? Amenhotep wrote a false report in an hour. Professionally in Ren Nakht's style, the old man studied 2 previous intercepted drafts and copied the handwriting with an accuracy that amazed me. The report said, supplies for 3 weeks, the wells provide little water, there is discord among the people, the elders are arguing about surrender, the letter to the Pharaoh is a rumor, not reality. All false. Ren Nakht had passed it through the boy to the wall. There, Tom's messenger took it, one of the people hiding by the rocks outside the general's camp. Now the high priest thought we were weaker than we were, and that we had no evidence. Let him think so. That night, for the first time in 5 days, I truly slept for 3 hours without dreams. On the 6th day, Neferu returned, alone, without Horsa. I met her at the gates. She was dusty with dark circles under her eyes, and for the first time in all the time I had known her, she looked tired. Horsa is with Mentuhotep, she said. Alive, all right. The merchant took him in. Did the letters go? They went. Mentuhotep sent his man to Karnak on the 2nd day already. His best messenger knows all the trails. To Minmes? Yes. And to Tia Nefer through another channel. through a trading house in Thebes that works with the palace. How long does it take a messenger to reach Thebes? 3 days there, 3 back. But Mentuhotep said, if Tia-Nefer wants to act quickly, she can write to the pharaoh the same day. So by the 7th day an answer may come? Neferu shrugged. It may, or not. Palaces think slowly. I nodded. Have you eaten? No. Come. We sat by the fire near the temple. Tia brought bread, dates, a bowl of lentil stew. Neferu ate silently, quickly, with the manner of a person used to eating not for pleasure, but for recovery. Then she said, Mentuhotep passed on something else. What? He says, 2 southern nomarchs are ready to support you openly. Not with troops, with trade and shelter. If the pharaoh declares you outside the law, they will give refuge. Names? Noctkor from Cana and Amenemhat from Edfu. Both have long been dissatisfied with Ptolemy's. Amenhotep, who had approached unnoticed, sat beside us. This is important, he said. 2 nomarchs are a political shield. If they openly trade with Amen-Oa, the pharaoh will think twice before crushing us by force. Because then he is crushing not just a fugitive, he is crushing part of his own administrative structure. Answer them with agreement, I said to Neferu. Already answered, she said. In your name. I looked at her. You answered in my name? Would you have agreed? Yes. Then what difference does it make? Amenhotep laughed quietly. The 7th morning came quietly. I again stood on the tower, which had already become my usual place for reflection. The sun rose slowly, red. Horemheb-Ha's army stood on the trails, disciplined, silent. The smoke from their fires rose evenly. At noon, the general was supposed to come for an answer. I did not know what I would say if the letter did not arrive. Another bluff? Another week? He had orders. Orders have a limit. Merritt came up beside me. You did not sleep all night? I slept. 2 hours, that does not count. For me, it counts. She looked at the horizon. Do you remember how, when we were little, we sat on the roof in Memphis? Looked at the stars and you said every star was a city? I remember. You were a strange boy then. Now I am a strange man. She laughed. Quietly, in a morning way. Stranger than anyone, she agreed. But I am glad you exist. At that moment, they shouted from below. I turned around. One of the guards at the gates was waving his hand. Messenger, from the west. Not from the north, where the army stood, from the west, through the bypass trail. I ran down from the wall. The messenger stood at the gates, young, dusty, in a cloak with the symbol of a trading house of Thebes. He handed me a small tube with a seal. The seal was not a merchant's. It was Tia-Nefer's personal seal. I broke the wax and unrolled the papyrus. I read slowly. Then again. Then I raised my head. Amenhotep stood beside me, reading my face. What? He asked. The pharaoh is recalling the army, I said. Silence. He is announcing an investigation against Tammuz and Set-Necht. Amen-Oa officially receives the status of a trading post with the right to water and land. And I am summoned to Thebes for trial. Not as a criminal, as a witness. Amenhotep closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. Tia-Nefer acted quickly. She was always a smart student, he said quietly. I went out to the gates and raised my hand. Open the gates. The guards exchanged glances. Why? Ptah asked. We are going to the general. I walked out of the gates for the first time in 7 days without a weapon, only with the papyrus in my hand. I walked across the sand toward the army camp. Horemheb-Ha came out to meet me alone. We again stood opposite each other in the middle of the desert. I held out the papyrus to him. He read for a long time, then folded it. This is a real seal, he said. Yes, then the order has changed. Yes, he was silent. You played smartly, Amun-Hor. I played honestly. Sometimes that is the same thing, he said. Then, almost without a pause. The army will move out by noon. The trails are free. We did not shake hands. We did not bow. We simply nodded, like 2 men who respect each other precisely because they do not pretend. I returned behind the wall. Bacon was already standing at the gates with that expression on his face, on which one huge unspoken phrase was written. So what happened? The army is leaving, I said. A second of silence. Then Bacon roared so loudly that the camels at the far end of the oasis flinched. People ran out of huts, from the market, from the forge, from the temple. Sekhmet smiled, rarely and truly. Tia nodded with the look that said, "I knew it." Cleopatra whispered a prayer to Isis. Merit hugged me from behind and said nothing. She just held me tightly. Amenhotep stood beside me and watched the army break camp. "You won a round," he said. "Only a round. Yes, now Thebes, the trial, Ptolemais. This will be harder." "I know. Are you ready?" I looked at the Oasis, at the people who were laughing, hugging, crying, at the walls we had laid with our hands, at the canals Bacon had dug with curses and stubbornness, at the temple where Cleopatra and Harry Chef were already lighting incense in gratitude. "No," I answered honestly, "but that does not matter. I am going anyway." Amenhotep nodded. The right answer. I was leaving at dawn. Not because it was beautiful, simply because in the desert the most dangerous crossing is made before the sun rises high. After noon the sand burns so much that skin cracks and water leaves faster than one can drink it. Dawn is the only time when the desert gives you a head start. But before I went out beyond the gates, I walked around Amun-Oa once more. It was not a ritual and not a farewell. I did not intend to die in Thebes. It was a habit. That same morning walk I had started in the first weeks. To look at everything with my own eyes, to feel the pulse of the place. But today the walk was different. Today I looked not for information, but for memory. 4 wells. Bacon had built them from scratch, with swearing and calluses, with faith that water was stronger than sand. They worked quietly, reliably, like the heart of the city. The canals, narrow, straight, lined with stone at the bottom so that the water would not seep into the sand. Ta had invented the laying himself by trial and error. The first canal leaked. The second held. By the fourth, he was already making them like a master. The walls were mud brick with battlements, with towers at the corners. Not perfect, but strong. On each battlement there was a small sign. A hand with water. Merit had drawn it. "So the gods can see that we are building, not destroying," she said. The market under the awning was already alive even this early. Horemheb was laying out flatbreads. An old nomad was fixing harness. 2 boys were arguing over a handful of dates. The temple of Isis cleansed with new columns of palm wood, with an altar on which a small fire always burned. Cleopatra and Harry Chef already stood there reading the morning hymn. Their voices merged, hers low, firm, his young, a little uneven, and together it sounded right. I stopped at the gates. Bacon stood beside me. He was silent, which was strange. Bacon was rarely silent. Usually by this moment he would already have managed to complain 3 times about the sand, the gods, and the weather. "What?" I asked. He looked at the wall. "You built this," he said at last. "Out of nothing. Out of one spring and ruins." "We built it. You began it. That is the difference." I shook my head. "You were the first to dig the well. Without water there would have been nothing." He was silent again. "Come back," he said simply. "I will come back. Not a promise to the gods. To me personally, to you personally. I will come back." He held out his hand. The handshake was strong, the kind that is not forgotten. Then he turned and went to the well. I could see from his back that he would not turn around. Not because he did not want to, because if he turned around, he would say something unnecessary. And Bacon did not like unnecessary words. Only necessary ones. Tia gave me a bag, flatbreads, dates, salt, a small jug of ointment for burns. Practical and without sentimentality. "There will be people there who will want to use you," she said. "I know. Not all of them look like enemies. I know, just remember." Sekhmet stood a little to the side, arms crossed. When I came up, she said, "If you do not return in 2 months, I will come for you." "To Thebes?" "Anywhere." I smiled. "Hold the Oasis." She nodded. That was all that needed to be said. Merit saw me off beyond the gates. She walked beside me silently for a few steps, then stopped at the edge of the trail, where the desert begins and the city ends. "I will be here," she said. "I know. Amun-Hor." "What?" "You owe them nothing. Not the pharaoh, not the court, not the priests. You built this yourself. Remember that there." I looked at her. My sister, thin with the calluses of a weaver, with a scar on her wrist from a pharaoh's chain, stood straight like a temple column. I will remember. I went beyond the gates. Amenhotep was already waiting by the camels, 3 animals, 2 for riding, 1 with baggage. Neferu checked the harness with the air of a professional who does not need to be told what to do. Horsa was going with us. He was a witness. His testimony was important. He rode on the 3rd camel, clutching the tube with documents as if his life were inside. In a sense, that was exactly so. I mounted the camel and looked back. Amanoa stood in the light of the early sun, mud brick walls, palms, towers, smoke above the forge. Small but alive. Real. Then I turned and rode forward. The road to Thebes took 7 days. The first 2 through open desert along trails that Neferu knew by heart. She rode first, reading the sand like a text. Here a camel caravan passed 3 days ago. Here under the dune there is water. Here stones worn of shifting ground. For her, the desert was not a threat, simply a language she had learned earlier than any other. On the first evening, we stopped by a rock that gave shade. The fire was small, only for cooking food. In the desert, a large fire at night is visible for 20 kilometers. Amenhotep sat by the fire and read. I do not know how he managed to read in such light, but he read a papyrus with notes about the pharaoh's court, about rituals, about rules of conduct at an audience. Do you need this? I asked. Not me, you. Listen. And he began to speak, not a lecture, a living story, about how the court is arranged, about the fact that the pharaoh is a sacred person, and looking directly at him is considered insolence, but looking at the floor is weakness, about the fact that one must bow 3 times upon entering but not fall prostrate unless asked, about the fact that one must speak briefly and clearly because palace advisors value time, and verbosity is perceived as uncertainty. Like at a thing, I said. Amenhotep was surprised. At a thing, a public assembly, where disputes are decided. It is important to speak publicly, briefly, with dignity. How do you know? I read. When I was a scribe. Did you read a lot? Everything that came my way. He was silent. That is good. People who read a lot do foolish things less often. Although, he added with a smile, sometimes they do foolish things more intricately. Neferu snorted. Horsa was silent almost all evening. He was nervous, understandably. A man who fled from the palace carries evidence against the high priest and is riding back. For that one needs either courage or despair, or both. I sat down next to him. How are you? I am afraid, he answered honestly. That is reasonable. Is a leader not supposed to calm people? Say that everything will be fine? A bad leader says that. A good one gives reasons not to be afraid. We have a reason. The scroll, 2 letters, testimony, 2 nomarchs behind us, and Amenhotep, who knows the court better than most courtiers. Horsa looked at me. And if that is not enough, then we will think on the spot. But I am not going there in order to lose. He nodded. He did not fully calm down, but something in his shoulders lowered. On the 3rd day, the desert changed. The sand became less loose, stony plains began, rare acacia bushes, traces of caravans. It was a busy route between Dakhla and the Nile. By the evening of the 3rd day, we saw the first Nile Canal. Water. Real Nile water. Green, slow, smelling of silt and life. I stopped the camel and looked at it for a minute. Amenhotep rode up beside me. Have you not seen the Nile for a long time? He asked. Since the night I fled Memphis. How does it feel? Strange. Too much water after the Oasis. He laughed. Wait. Thebes will be even stranger. Thebes opened before us at dawn on the 5th day. I expected a big city, but what I saw was more than a big city. It was another dimension. Memphis, where I had grown up, was huge by the standards of the lower quarters, noisy, dense, with bazaars and ports. But Thebes was different. The bank of the Nile here was built up so tightly that houses stood one behind another like teeth. Temples rose above the city like mountains, with pylons 30 cubits high, with rows of sphinxes at the entrance, with obelisks that burned gold under the morning sun. Markets ran along the bank in an unbroken ribbon. Hundreds of boats on the Nile. Thousands of people already in the streets. Porters, merchants, priests in white, soldiers with spears, women with jugs, children with fish. Noise, smell, life. I felt small, not weak, exactly small. Like a man who had lived a long time in his own world and suddenly stepped outside and saw how large the rest of the world was. Neferu rode beside me. Have you been here? I asked. Once. Long ago. I prefer the desert. Why? Because in the desert you can see the enemy. Here, no. That was said precisely. Amenhotep took the initiative from the moment we entered the city. He knew where to stay, a small house in the western quarter, belonging to an old copyist who owed him an old favor. A quiet place without unnecessary eyes. Exactly what was needed. The owner, a small bald man named Uwahen, opened the door, saw Amenhotep, and stared at him for a long time. "You are alive," he said at last. Obviously, the old man answered, "I heard you were killed. You heard wrong. Will you let us in?" Uwahen let us in. That night we gathered in a small room with a low ceiling and a single lamp. Amenhotep laid out on the floor everything we had. Tia Nefer's letter with her personal seal, a copy of the scroll with evidence of the theft, Horsa's testimony written in his own hand, letters from the two nomarchs Naktkor and Amenemhat confirming their support. This was our arsenal. Tomorrow morning, Amenhotep said, "You will be brought to an audience." Tia Nefer arranged the meeting through the chief steward of the palace. Officially, you are a witness in the case of the treasury theft. Unofficially, you are a man who must either be destroyed or brought over to the side of the court. Does Toms know we are here? I asked. By morning he will know. In Thebes, nothing remains secret longer than 12 hours. Then he will try to do something before the audience? Possibly. Therefore, no one goes out at night. The door is locked. Neferu listens to the street. Neferu was already sitting by the window, small, barred, opening onto an alley, with a dagger on her knee, as always. Horsa asked, "If Ptolemies wants to remove me before the trial, then you will be alive only because we are here." Amenhotep answered without unnecessary diplomacy. Encouraging, Horsa muttered. But honest. I looked at the scrolls and thought, Ptolemies was smart. That meant he would not go for a crude murder. It was too noticeable. He would try to discredit. He would tell the pharaoh that the scrolls were forged. He would say that Amenhotep was senile, that I was a dangerous rebel using witnesses as cover. For this he needed one thing, to speak first. Amenhotep, I said, can Tia Nefer arrange a meeting with me before the official audience? The old man slowly raised his head. It is difficult, but possible. Early in the morning, before Toms has time to report to the pharaoh. You want to speak with the pharaoh's wife personally? I want her to tell her husband the truth before the priest tells lies. Amenhotep looked at me for a long time. You think politically, I think like a scribe. The one who submits the document first shapes the perception of the others. The old man nodded. Uwahen knows Tia Nefer's messenger. We will try. Try now, at night. Amenhotep stood up, adjusted his cloak, and went out into the room to Uwahen. I remained with Neferu and Horsa. Neferu looked out the window. Are you ever afraid? I asked her. Constantly. It does not show. That is because I do not show it. Fear does not disappear if you show it. It only spreads to others. I looked at her. That is wise. That is practical. Difference. Horsa suddenly said, I want to return to the Oasis. After all this. We both looked at him. There? Neferu asked. Yes, there people build. Here people hide. The difference is great. I nodded. There will be a place for you. Amenhotep returned after a quarter of an hour. Uwahen sent the messenger. Tia Nefer will be waiting for us in her garden courtyard before dawn. This is a breach of etiquette, but she is ready. She was always decisive. We go now. Yes. The garden of the pharaoh's wife's palace was small by palace standards, and enormous by the standards of everything I had seen in the last year. A pond with lotuses, palms, stone paths, lamps on posts, the smell of jasmine and incense, the silence that exists only where it is guarded intentionally. Tia Nefer waited by the pond. She was older than I expected, about 45, in dark linen without ornaments. A beautiful face, but not ceremonial, the intelligent face of a person who thinks a lot and rarely says everything she thinks. Lively, assessing eyes. When she saw Amenhotep, something in her face trembled very briefly, almost imperceptibly. Teacher, she said quietly. Student, he answered. They did not embrace, they simply looked at each other for a second. Then she shifted her gaze to me. Amenhor. Great lady. Amenhotep wrote to me about you, but I wanted to see for myself. What did you want to see? A man, not a legend. Legends are listened to, men are helped, direct and precise. We sat by the pond, she, I, Amenhotep. Neferu and Horsa remained at the entrance. I spoke briefly, as Amenhotep had taught, without unnecessary words, with facts, with respect. I told about Set Necht, about the scroll, about Ptolemys, about what had been built in Amon-Oa. I did not ask for pity, I laid it out. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was silent. The Pharaoh already knows part of it. My letter reached him yesterday evening. He was thoughtful. Is that good or bad? I asked. The Pharaoh's thoughtfulness is an opportunity. Rage is not. Then we have a chance. Ptolemys will try to discredit the scrolls. I know. Therefore, this morning, before the audience, the Pharaoh will receive a second scroll. Mine, in which I personally confirm the authenticity of the transferred documents and ask for a fair trial. You are taking a risk. I have been taking risks for 20 years living at this court, she answered without a shadow of complaint. This is simply another risk, Amenhotep said softly. You grew wise. You were a good teacher, she answered just as softly. We left before dawn, morning of the trial. The audience began at the 3rd hour. The Pharaoh's hall was enormous, columns that 4 men could encircle, a ceiling so high that it seemed like the sky, walls painted with scenes of victories, gods, and hunts. On the throne at the end of the hall, a figure in the double crown. I walked, remembering every word of Amenhotep. 3 bows upon entry, gaze directed into the space between oneself and the throne, arms along the body. Thomas stood by the right column, tall, dry, with a white staff. When I entered, he looked at me with that cold emptiness found in people who have long decided that the lives of others have no value. I looked straight at him. He narrowed his eyes slightly. The audience began. Ptolemys was given the floor first by rank. He spoke smoothly, confidently. Fugitive, rebel, forged documents, dangerous precedent, threat to Meiti. Each word had been polished by years of palace practice. Then I was given the floor. I took the only papyrus I carried with me, the original copy of the scroll with Minmas's signature from Karnak. Great Pharaoh, I said, I have not come to justify myself. I have come to deliver the truth. I placed the scroll before the steward. This is a record of the theft of the treasury, signed by the chief keeper of the Karnak archive, Minmay. 200 talents went through the account of the vizier Set Necht, 100 through the personal account of the high priest of Amun. The hall became quiet. Thomas took a step forward. Forgery! Minmes is alive, I answered. He can be summoned. A pause. The Pharaoh raised his hand. Everyone fell silent. He looked at the scroll, then at me, then at Thomas, and said one word, Minmes. The steward nodded and went out. Thomas turned pale. I stood and looked straight ahead. Amenhotep was right. The desert was simpler than the palace. But now, in this enormous hall, with the smell of incense and cold light through the high slits in the ceiling, I felt the same thing I had felt at the walls of Amon-Oa on the night before the siege. Not certainty, readiness. And that is sometimes more important. I continue the final part, about 4,000 words in living text without cuts. The hall froze. It was that special silence that happens only in large rooms when hundreds of people simultaneously stop breathing at full strength. Courtiers by the columns, scribes by the walls, guards with spears at the entrance. All of them looked at the same center. At the Pharaoh, at the scroll before the steward, and at Thames, who still stood straight, but already with that whiteness in his face that appears in a man when the ground beneath him begins to split. I stood in the middle of the hall and waited. This was the hardest part. Not battle, not siege, not negotiations with a general. Exactly this. To stand and wait when everything has already been done and nothing more can be added. Only to be here and keep my back straight. Amenhotep stood behind me, slightly to the right. I felt his presence as support, not physical, but the kind given by a person standing beside you who knows what he is doing. Tommy spoke again, quieter but harder. Great Pharaoh, this man uses the name of a respected archivist as a shield? Menemez is old and ill. He could have been forced, deceived, frightened. A man who built an illegal settlement in the desert and killed the pharaoh's envoys is capable of any lie. The pharaoh did not answer. He looked at the scroll with an expression that said nothing outwardly, but inside obviously worked very actively. I said evenly, Minmez can be asked personally. If he lies under the pharaoh's gaze in the presence of the gods, then judge me. If not, judge the one who calls an honest archivist a liar. Ptolemy's looked at me. There was no hatred in his gaze, only cold calculation. He was recalculating the options right before my eyes. I saw it as clearly as I had seen the movement of Horemheb-Ha's army on the horizon. After a quarter of an hour, Minmez was brought in. The old man was exactly as Horsa had described him. About 70, with arthritic fingers, bent, with a face like dried papyrus, many wrinkles, but each clear. 2 servants led him under the arms. He walked slowly, but when he raised his head and looked around, there was such clarity in his eyes that it was impossible to doubt his mind. He saw Tom's and stopped for a fraction of a second, then moved on. The steward asked him whether the scroll had been written in the Karnak archive and whether his signature was genuine. Mimis answered without pause. Yes. I personally recorded the movement of the sums. I kept the records for 12 years in the hope that a day would come when they could be handed where they belonged. He raised his eyes to the pharaoh. That day has come. The hall became quiet again. Ptolemy's made his last attempt. The old man has lost his mind. His words were dictated by those who brought him. I demand that the documents be checked by the priests of Amun. By priests who serve you, I asked. Several courtiers by the columns exchanged glances. It was a risky question, almost insolence. But there was truth in it, which the hall felt physically. The pharaoh finally spoke. His voice was even without shouting, but with that weightiness found in people accustomed to each of their words having consequences. Bring Horsa. Horsa entered the hall like a man who had made a choice and was now going to the end. It was visible in his step, not confident, no, but steady. Like a man on a rocking ship who has learned to keep balance not through immobility, but through constant small corrections. He bowed 3 times, as required, and stood before the steward. He was asked about what he had seen and heard. He spoke evenly, without embellishment, naming dates, sums, names. He told about the meeting between Setnecht and Atames in the side hall of the temple, about how by chance he had ended up behind a column and heard the conversation about the distribution of the stolen money, about how the next day he realized that he had been seen and fled. While he spoke, I watched Tams. The high priest stood motionless. He no longer interrupted. He understood that interrupting was pointless. His face became the face of an experienced player who understood he had lost the game but had not yet decided how to admit it. When Horsa finished, no one in the hall spoke for a long time. Then the pharaoh said, Toms. He raised his head. Do you want to answer? A long pause. Great pharaoh, Toms finally pronounced. I have served the gods and you for 40 years. That is not an answer, the pharaoh said. Another pause, longer. Tommy's lowered the staff. It was not a gesture of submission, it was the gesture of a man who had run out of words. The steward whispered something to the pharaoh. He listened without turning, looking straight ahead. Toms, high priest of Amun, is removed from office until the investigation is complete. His property and archives come under the supervision of the treasury. A pause. Guards. 2 guards approached Toms. He did not resist. He only looked at me one last time with an expression I remembered. Not hatred. Something more complex. Perhaps something like recognition. Then he was led away. The hall exhaled. The others were asked to leave. Only I, Amenhotep, Tianefer by the side column, and several high advisors by the walls remained in the hall. The steward whispered something, the pharaoh nodded, and the steward also stepped aside. The pharaoh looked at me for a long time. He was a man of about 50, not old, but with a face on which the years of power had left those special marks that come not from age but from the constant necessity to decide. Fatigue under the eyes, sharpness in the eyes. You are a scribe, he said at last. Not a question, a statement. I was. Now I build. What have you built? An oasis with 4 wells, canals, walls, a market, and a temple. 300 people who came there as refugees and stayed as residents. In a year? In a year and 3 months. He was silent. My tax collectors reported you to me as a rebel. Tax collectors reported what Toms wanted to hear. You killed Setnecht. He stormed my oasis with an army. He was killed during the battle. You refused to open the gates before the army. I opened negotiations and waited for justice. The pharaoh looked at me with an expression I could not fully read. Not hostility, rather the cautious assessment with which a smart man looks at something that does not fit the usual picture. What do you want? What do? He asked. A direct question. I answered just as directly. Official status for Manhwa, the right to water and land. A trade agreement with 2 southern nomarchs, and the charges against me removed publicly so everyone knows. Not little for a fugitive scribe. I am no longer a fugitive scribe. Tianefer by the column smiled slightly. I did not look at her, but saw it from the corner of my eye. The pharaoh turned his head toward one of the advisors who approached, listened to a quiet question, answered even more quietly. Then the pharaoh looked at me again. Manhwa receives the status of a trading post under the protection of the pharaoh. The land is yours. The water is yours. Trade agreements through the treasury? A pause. Tribute, 2% of trade turnover annually. 1.5%, I said. The advisor by the wall raised his head. The courtier beside him opened his mouth. The pharaoh's face did not change. 1.5%, he agreed. And you personally answer for order on your trails. Robbers, pirates, fugitive slaves, all of this is your zone. Accepted. The charges are removed. The decree will be signed today. He raised his hand, a signal that the audience was over. I bowed 3 times and stepped back. After the hall. In the corridor behind the hall, Amenhotep stopped and leaned against the wall. I thought he felt ill, but he simply closed his eyes for a few seconds, then opened them. You bargained with the pharaoh, he said. Yes. No one bargains with the pharaoh. He agreed. That is the most surprising thing. I looked at him. You yourself taught me the one who names the price first loses. He named 2%. I answered, I taught you that in relation to merchants. Is there a difference? Amenhotep looked at me for a long time, then quietly laughed, truly from surprise. No, he said. There is no difference. Tianefer came out through the side door. She stopped beside us, folded her hands. You made an impression, she said. A good one? Ambiguous. The pharaoh is not used to people who object to him. I did not object. I clarified the terms. It is the same thing, but the result is good. She looked at Amenhotep. Will you return to Karnak? No, he answered simply. There is nothing more for me there. My place now is in Manhwa. Something in her face trembled again. That same brief, almost invisible reaction as at the first meeting in the garden. Take care of yourself, teacher. Too late to start. She smiled and left lightly like a person who had done what she wanted and was satisfied with the result. Horsa stood by the corridor wall and looked at the floor. It is over, I said to him. He raised his head. What is over? Your testimony has been accepted. You are an official witness of the pharaoh. Ptolemy's is under guard. Nothing threatens you anymore. He exhaled as if he had not breathed for several hours. And my family? Mentuhotep is already working on it. By the time we return to the oasis, your wife and daughter will be there. He covered his face with his hands. I did not say anything. I simply waited. Then he lowered his hands and said hoarsely, Thank you. You came to us yourself. This is your decision. You could have not accepted me. I could have. But we are building a place for people who made the right choice. You made the right one. Nefru came up from behind and said businesslike, We move out tomorrow morning. No point sticking around in Thebes longer than necessary. The last night in Thebes. That night I did not sleep until late. Not from anxiety, but from that strange state that comes after great tension, when the tension has already been released, but the body has not yet understood it and continues to stay ready. I sat in the small courtyard of Uahin's house. Above my head, the Theban sky, thickly sown with stars. The smell of the Nile came from the east, silty, alive, unlike anything else. Amenhotep came out and sat beside me. We were silent for a long time. It was a good silence, the kind that happens between people who do not need to fill the pause. Then he said, You are thinking about the oasis? Yes, about what exactly, I thought. About the fact that now everything will change. Before, we were outside the law. It is strange, but that gave us the freedom to do things our own way because there was nothing to lose. Now we are official. That means rules, inspections, tribute, treasury scribes. And that worries you? A little. I do not want Amon-Oa to become an ordinary trading post. It will not, Amenhotep said, because an ordinary trading post is built for money. You built for people. That is a difference no official status can erase. Are you sure? No. But I have seen many cities and many rulers. Those who build for money grow rich and empty. Those who build for people grow, more slowly but more deeply. I looked at the stars. Do you ever regret coming to us? The old man was silent. No. I regret that I did not leave Karnak earlier. I endured too long what should not have been endured. That is a mistake I do not want to repeat. Are you glad you are here? I am glad I am doing something real. At the end of life, that matters most. I nodded. Tomorrow we go home. Yes? Home. The word sounded right. The road back seemed shorter. Not because the path had changed. The same dunes, the same stony plain, the same smell of dust and acacia. But something inside was different. When you ride with a heavy burden, the burden presses. When you return with an answer, the same path feels different. Neferu rode first, as always. On the third day, she suddenly stopped at the top of a dune and turned around. Look, I came up beside her. On the horizon, a thin strip of green. Palms, our palms. Horsa, who rode up after us, said quietly, "There it is." Amenhotep narrowed his eyes. The walls have grown. Bacon did not waste time. He never wasted, I answered. We descended from the dune and moved forward. The gates. The guard on the tower noticed us first. I heard him shout something inside. Then again, louder. By the time we reached the gates, half the oasis was already standing there. Bacon came out first, as always, big, dusty, with a hammer at his belt. He looked at me, then at Amenhotep, then at me again. Alive, he said. I promised. No army, no Ptolemies, under guard. The decree? Signed? He was silent for a second. Then he turned to the people behind the gates and roared so loudly that the nearby camels shied away. They have returned with the decree. What happened next is difficult to describe in order. People ran out of the gates, shouted, grabbed our hands. Sekhmet appeared from the crowd, looked at me with that squint of hers, and nodded once, shortly, as if putting a seal. Tia stood at the gates with her arms crossed, and with a smile I had never seen on her before, broad, real. Cleopatra and Harishef came out of the temple. Cleopatra raised the amulet of Isis. Harishef whispered something, a prayer, or simply words of joy. Merit. She did not shout. She did not run. She simply stood at the gates and looked. I climbed down from the camel and came up to her. I came back, I said. I knew, she answered. How? Because you do not know how to lose. I laughed. Truly, for the first time in a very long time. She took my hand and dragged me inside. Come, Bacon has been preparing a feast for 3 days already. 3 days? He was sure you would return with victory. I did not argue. The feast was real. Not a modest celebration by the fire. Real, with long tables, with food enough for everyone, with beer and date wine, with music and lights, with children who ran between the tables and dragged away dates. Horsa sat beside a young woman and a little girl, his wife and daughter, whom Mentuhotep had managed to transport to the oasis 3 days before our return. He almost did not eat, only held their hands and sometimes looked at them with such a face that those sitting nearby turned away out of delicacy. Ren Nakht, the former spy, sat at the end of the table quietly, not claiming a place in the center. He had worked well in recent weeks, and Sekhmet told me she trusted him exactly as much as necessary. That was enough. Mentuhotep, who appeared the day after our return with a caravan of salt and bronze, sat beside Amenhotep and argued with him animatedly about something, with gestures. Amenhotep argued back, no less animatedly. I did not hear the subject, but both looked pleased. Neferu sat at the edge of the table, ate silently, watched the people. I sat down beside her. Are you all right? Yes, just looking. At what? She was silent. At what came of it? A year ago there was only a spring and strangers' bones here. Now this. I looked where she was looking. Did you think about this when you found me by the water? No, I thought, a strange man. He will die by morning. Almost guessed right. Almost, she agreed, and added quietly, Good that I was wrong. I raised a jug of date wine. To Amun-Oa. She raised hers. To the people of Amun-Oa. That was more correct. Bacon rose in the middle of the feast, as always without any special plan, simply stood up and began to speak. I do not know how to speak beautifully, he began. Everyone knows that. That is true, Tia confirmed from her corner. Laughter. But I will say one thing. When I dug the first well, I thought, why? There are 3 of us. The water is running out. The Pharaoh is looking for us. Why dig? He was silent. And then the water came. Real water. And I understood. That is why. Because if you do not dig, there is no water. No water, no city. No city, no us. He raised his mug. Amun-Hor began digging. We all dug together. And here. He swept his hand around everything. This is ours. Not the pharaohs, not the priests, not the viziers. Ours. The hall rose. I had not planned to speak, but when Bacon sat down, people looked at me and I stood. Amenhotep once told me, those who build for money grow rich and empty. Those who build for people grow. I looked at the faces, Bacon with Miriam, Tia, Sekhmet, Ptah, Cleopatra, Harishef, Horsa with his family, Ren-Nakht, Neferu, young Sif, the teenager Angkor beside his father. New people whose names I had not yet remembered, but whose faces had already become part of the place. We are growing, I said. That was all that needed to be said. Morning after the feast. The morning came quietly. The market opened as always. Horemheb with flatbreads, the old nomad with harness, children with dates. Bacon went in the morning to see how the new canal to the western garden was going. Ta was repairing something by the forge, whistling. Tia handed out rations. Cleopatra opened the temple. Amenhotep sat at his permanent place with papyri. I sat down beside him. What are you reading? Writing. A register. New people, new buildings, new agreements. Already? Since morning. Order begins with records. I looked at him. Amenhotep? Yes, did you ever think you would end up here? He put down the pen. I thought I would die in Karnak among scrolls that no one reads. A pause. That would have been a pity. A pity. Here my scrolls are read. That is the difference. Neferu came up and placed before us 2 jugs of water and a bowl of dates. Breakfast, she said. You cooked? Amenhotep was surprised. No. Tia cooked. I brought it. That is progress too. She snorted and left. I took a date and looked at the oasis. Walls, canals, towers, temple, market, forge, storehouses, gardens, people. A year ago, one spring and ruins. Now a city. Not perfect, not rich, not great in the sense in which Thebes or Memphis are great, but alive. Real. Built by the hands of people who had nowhere else to go, and therefore decided to build where they stood. Merritt brought me a cloak. The mornings were still cool. What are you thinking about? She asked. About what comes next. And what will come? I looked east where the desert stretched beyond the horizon, endless, harsh, beautiful. More people, more water, more walls, new trails, new alliances, new enemies, probably. Sounds exhausting. Sounds like life. She laughed and went to the loom. I remained sitting. Amenhotep wrote. From afar came the sound of Bakan's hammer. Closer, Sekhmet's voice, already training archers. Even closer, the smell of fresh bread from Nefertari. Everything in its place, everything alive. It was enough. For today. And tomorrow, build again.